Outside of a dog, a book is a man's best friend. Inside of a dog, it's too dark to read.
Remember, you're fighting for this woman's honor, which is probably more than she ever did.
Hello again, and welcome back to the series. I'm your host, and today we are looking at Disney Animation's 101 Dalmatians from 1961, the sixth film of their post-World War II era, known most commonly as the Silver Age, or as I like to call it, the era of Walt's final dreams. This script was written by Babs.
I do, however, have a head. It's attached to my body, it is me.
So thank you, Babs.
It'll still be me.
If you're new here, welcome for the first time of, I hope, many. And if you're returning, I thank you once again for your continued patronage. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into this together. Unlike almost every other film we have discussed up till this point in the D.E.A.R series, which all had their origination points somewhere in the 1930s, 1920s, or even all the way back into Walt's childhood in the earliest part of the century, the story of this production cannot start until the book it was based on is actually written. And for once, Walt had decided to adapt some contemporary source material.
Hooray!
Dodie Smith had published her classic novel 101 Dalmatians in 1956, and it was only a matter of months until it was brought to Walt's attention by screenwriter Charles Brackett, sometime before February 1957. Walt saw the novel as an ideal follow-up to Sleeping Beauty, the film they currently had in production, and acquired the rights to Dalmatians in November of '57, putting it into production straight away. Thanks to the novel's modern setting, this is the only time we got to see Disney under Walt fully represent and interpret the world that he and the rest of his legendary staff actually inhabited, if you're not counting the package films or Bambi or Dumbo, because they're really not about the contemporary setting at all, none of them are. But this one is. The original book, it is interesting to note, was a little bit too racist even for Disney, as some elements were excised in the transition from page to screen, some more troubling elements, at least to modern audiences. Despite this flaw, the book and its bizarre sequel are actually fantastic, and I highly recommend them, at least from what I can remember from reading them in my childhood. They were very, very good, so yes, try them out. Dodie Smith had originally gotten the idea for the book itself from a comment a friend of hers had made one day, definitely in jest, about how pretty Smith's dog's hides would look if they were turned into a coat. This one offhand instance of dark humor set Dodie's mind whirling. And with the idea for a villain, as somebody who would possibly imagine such a thought for real, and the idea of Cruella informing the rest of the book, she immediately cranked out the beloved, best-selling, all-time classic that so thoroughly captured the imagination of Mr. Disney. Now, let's talk about Bill Peet. After acquiring the rights in late 1957, Walt gave the entire assignment of adapting the book into a film script to one man, Bill Peet. Bill had been at the company for 2 decades at this point, starting all the way back at the very end of production on Snow White, and he had worked on virtually every Disney animated classic since then. Bill had long since become the master of the storyboard, having provided the bulk of this work on films like Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan. But this film would be the first time he was given an entire story to write on his own, and indeed the first time any man had been given the task of writing an entire Disney animation film solo. Peet got to work immediately, completing his first draft by hand on legal paper in a matter of weeks. After Walt had approved this script, Peet then got down to his regular task of storyboarding the entire thing, and the production was visually off to the races. Peet had done incredibly impressive work in both writing the script and adapting the story successfully to a visual medium. So impressive, in fact, that after eventually seeing the finished film, Dodie Smith herself wrote directly to Bill, telling him that he had improved her story. We will touch upon Bill much more again next time when we discuss The Sword in the Stone, another film that he had an enormous hand in shaping, and then once more again for The Jungle Book after it. And Bill, for those of you who don't know, and I've mentioned this in other videos before, I believe, for Peter Pan and so on and so forth, but Bill wrote all of the books that I have stacked here on the desk and that I sometimes feature in videos, including this one, The Wump World, which is one of my favorite ones. I love The Wump World. But I've got about a dozen plus Bill Peet books here, about 15 of them. And yeah, he's just a wonderful children's book author. He did his entire line of just original, animated, written all by himself books. After he worked at Disney, he was one of the great American artists of the 20th century. And yeah, Bill Peet is a name that more people should be familiar with. More people who love animation should know, and who love art and children's entertainment should know. Great, great books. Any parents looking for great children's book, look for Bill Peet. Search him out. He's the best. All of these are basically just a Disney short film of their own, just in animatic, fairy tale book form. Like, they're just essentially quirky little short films on paper. And yeah, I love them very much.
I love the way you make them!
After the financial failure of the ultra-expensive Sleeping Beauty 2 years earlier in 1959, Walt decided to stop having the company hand ink their movies, successfully introducing here the look and process of xerography to Disney's audience. Xerography was a newer, faster, cheaper method of animation, pioneered in differing versions of the same process by both Bill Justice and Ub Iwerks. The Xerox method, or xerography as it is often called, allowed the animators' drawings to be copied directly onto the cells themselves, eliminating much of the inking portion of the ink and paint process, and virtually getting rid of the entire Disney inking department overnight. This massively sped up production and drastically slashed budgets, and while it did give the films a rougher, somewhat cheaper, and decidedly less glossy and glamorous look in some viewers' eyes, the alleviation of a financial burden allowed Disney Animation to stay solvent and in active production for the next 25 years, until another radically different animation method began to be incorporated into Disney films in the late 1980s, a method that would eventually entirely consume the animation department: computer-generated imaging. And with it, the dawn of an age of financial success so great that they would never have to depend on cost-cutting methods like xerography ever again. A quarter century before the revolutionary introduction of CGI, however, xerography was once the young, sexy, new, cost-effective animation process on the market, and Disney would commit to this visual aesthetic and method hard throughout the 1960s and 70s. They had experimented with Xerox in the dragon fight sequence at the end of Sleeping Beauty, as well as a subsequent short in the run-up to fully animating this film, but 101 Dalmatians ended up becoming the first film made entirely using the Xerox method. As is typical with this era of animation and with his brand of entertainment overall, this film is yet another example of Walt's love for England, and in particular London and all things British, following along in the footsteps of Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan, and leading on to both The Sword and the Stone, and especially to Mary Poppins. This narrative is another grand love letter to all of England, showing both the city and the countryside extensively, and giving London in particular a fabulous visual style, so incredibly fresh, hip, and modern for the time that it was produced. Yeah, the art style in this film, with how angular it is, really reminds me of kind of a 1960s Hercules in a way. Another element through which England is allowed to shine through is in the many people and animals of England that we meet along the journey, complete with their many distinct types of English accent and dialect.
There's no one out tonight.
We've got to keep trying, Birdie.
Tell me, Danny. Tell me.
Wait a minute.
Prissy, come in here.
And this was one of the peaks. Sleeping Beauty and this were basically the peaks of that voice acting talent, in my opinion. Up there with probably Peter Pan as well. And Alice. Yeah, those four. And really just everything in this era. Just, God, the voice acting is on such another level. Yeah, such a level. Lady and the Tramp 2, of course. Yeah. On a production budget of around $4 million, the film grossed well over $14 million upon initial release, becoming the first animated film ever to crack $10 million at the box office.
$100 billion!
The reviews were just as positive, hailing the film as a return to form and yet another timeless Disney classic, with many reviewers calling it the studio's best film since Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs 24 years earlier. Because of how incredibly well this film did upon initial release, and its many theatrical re-releases, this film, more than almost any other in Disney's history, has spawned spin-offs, such as a sequel film, sequel TV series, live-action remake, sequel to the live-action remake, and a live-action villain origin story for Cruella. This 1961 film has had such a massive impact on the Disney company itself over the last 60 plus years and has made so very, very much money. Whatever you may think of the quality of its many various and different installments afterwards, we must admit and acknowledge that, however messily, Disney's 101 Dalmatians franchise still endures, to this day, just as strong as ever.
Now that's impressive!
Oh, Pongo. It's her.
I've decided to give each of the central couples their own sections together, rather than discussing the four lead characters separately on their own. First up are our two true leads, the dog parents of eventually dozens and dozens of puppies, the wonderful Pongo and Perdita. Any discussion of them must include the observation that they are a perfect example of a healthy and equal relationship, both as partners and as parents. These two are as strong as any romantic couple has ever been in Disney history, starting right at the beginning of the film with one of Disney's greatest meet-cutes, the fateful double walk in the park. From that very first moment of Pongo spying Perdita walking alongside Anita on the pavement, these two are meant to be together, and all they had to do was to get their pet humans together as well. A little bit like parents having their children hang out with each other because they already have an established adult friendship.
So, do you guys want to hang up here for a while?
Their remarkable bond is built on such mutual affection, care, gentleness, and selflessness that it is almost impossible to picture one character without automatically thinking of the other. Not only are they one of Disney and cinema's greatest romantic couples, animal or otherwise, but they're also possibly the greatest parents ever put to film by Disney, as they risk life, limb, and general well-being again and again for their children, putting everything on the line in a desperate attempt to save their puppies' lives. Pongo is energetic, resourceful, creative, silly, and exuberantly loving, while Perdita is calm, sincere, thoughtful, caring, and remarkably unfailingly warm and maternal. Together they form one of Disney's all-time greatest pairs of characters, and I adore them more and more with each rewatch. Their designs are also extremely impressive, the Disney artists able to ever so subtly differentiate the two within any shot, making it instantly clear for the audience which of these dogs is which at any moment, and that's surprisingly hard with two dogs sometimes of the same breed. This perfection of their characters does not make them boring, however. The two are always interesting to watch and generally a lot of fun. Pongo reminding me a lot of 1973 Robin Hood, or even of course a little bit in his body language of Tramp from just 6 years prior, and Perdita reminding me strongly of the personalities of both 1973 Maid Marian and also Feline from Bambi all the way back in 42. Rod Taylor, an actor of Australian origin who would later appear in The Birds and who, while working on this film, turned down the opportunity to maybe play James Bond, thinking it unlikely to succeed.
You chose poorly.
Is wonderful as Pongo, both narrating the film as the character and also just voicing the character overall. He lends a marvelous warmth to our patriarchal dog, making Pongo and the film itself instantly likable from the very moment we hear him begin to speak in the opening. Perdita was brought to life in a joint performance from Kate Bauer and Lisa Daniels, and they in turn do the same for the female half of the pair, conjuring her in an endlessly kind, patient, perfectly soft way. As the production dragged on for longer than she had expected, Lisa eventually got married after recording most of her lines and moved to New York with her husband, wherein Kate was brought in to finish the part. Perdita is instantly sympathetic and charming from the moment that she appears on screen, thanks very much to both of her lovely actresses. All in all, Pongo and Perdita might just be my favorite romantic animal pairing in the entire Disney animated canon. It's a difficult choice, but they're certainly up there.
Dee-dum-da-da-dee, da-dum-da-da-dum.
Ta-tum-tee-ta-tum. Such clever lyrics.
Melody first, my dear, and then the lyrics,
As adorable as their dogs are, Roger and Anita basically equal them in how incredibly cute they are as a romantic pair. They truly complete each other from the moment they so memorably meet on screen, sopping wet and confused, to the end of the story after they've gone through a harrowing few days of their puppies' lives being in danger. I must admit that, now that I have experienced that exact feeling myself, this film is all the more truly stressful to watch, seeing what Roger and Anita go through worrying about their children. The loosely animated flirting between Roger and Anita is so fun to see, especially when they dance together, or whenever Anita laughs at Roger's utter unseriousness.
Oh,
To
Roger.
see her is to take a sudden chill.
These two characters are truly in love with and comfortable with each other, and they remain, as they were at the time, one of Disney's most thoroughly modern and entirely aspirational romantic pairings. Their dynamic and bond is the quiet backbone of the film, alongside Pongo and Perdita's more obvious starring pair, and the two human parents/grandparents of the puppies here do so much to contribute to the overall charm and relatability of the narrative. Their chemistry is real, believable, and just plain nice, and we root for them right away. The English actor Ben Wright provided the speaking voice for Roger, while the American Bill Lee provided the singing performance. Bill Lee also doubled for Shere Khan's one sung line in That's What Friends Are For 6 years later in The Jungle Book. Ben is able to give Roger an easy, silly, knowing, but never superior sense of humor. He knows exactly where the line is and how to repeatedly dance back and forth over it, as shown in the truly iconic Cruella De Vil song sequence. Some of his line deliveries especially are just so funny, and the animation on Roger when he is waiting for the puppies to be born and just nervously smoking is absolutely top-notch in terms of both being hilarious and, again, Far too real. Lisa Davis, who as of the recording of this video is still with us, provided the absolutely lovely voice of Anita. She brings an easy, smiling kindness to every one of her line reads, and her friendship with Cruella in the story only further reinforces the idea that Anita is just the biggest sweetheart imaginable, willing to be friends with absolutely anybody, regardless of how utterly insane they might at first seem. Together, Roger and Anita form one of the strongest families in the history of Disney, and they're an utter delight to see, hear, and experience every time I rewatch the film. It's very cool that she and both Mary Costa are still with us, so we have one member, at least, of the casts of both Sleeping Beauty and 101 Dalmatians still alive as of 2025. As is the case nowadays with so many of these classic Disney characters, Roger and Anita were in fact two of the first characters to get a live-action remake adaptation of their own, all the way back in 1996, when these wretched live-action remakes were just starting to be produced at all. That time around, they were played by Jolie Richardson as Anita and Jeff Daniels as Roger, who is not doing an accent in the film, meaning that Roger is, like Jeff himself, an American. He is also now a video game designer instead of a songwriter, the switch to an American, removing easily the character of Roger's best moments in the story, the singing of the song. I've never minded the switch to an American Roger, but I must confess I have always hated the switch from songwriter to video game designer and the removal of the song scene. It simply blows as an adaptational choice. It blows. Anyway, this original 1961 Roger and Anita are nothing less than marvelous.
Anita, darling!
How are you?
Miserable, darling, as usual, perfectly wretched.
Speaking of yet more utterly perfect casting choices, Betty Lou Gerson is phenomenally, generationally great as Cruella. With a beautifully unhinged visual design and animation from Mark Davis, as we will get into more in a little while, Betty was able to deliver one of the most delicious, delightful, and truly pure evil performances in cinema history. There's something very like a completely off-the-rails, shamelessly violent and aggressive Maleficent about Gerson's Cruella, especially from the dry, wry crackle in her voice that you can hear coming through in both Maleficent and Cruella's mad cackles.
How quaint. Even the rabble.
My only true love, darling. I live for furs.
Where Eleanor Audley as the evil fairy in 1959 was nearly constantly subtle, reserved, and dreadfully, threateningly polite, however, Gerson as De Vil in 1961 is at almost all times brash, bullying, and effortlessly, acutely unpleasant. This all makes even more sense when you note that Mr. Davis also designed and animated Maleficent 2, meaning the Disney villain DNA connection runs very deep indeed between these two characters. Of working with Gerson, Mark had this to say about her. Her voice was the greatest thing I've ever had a chance to work with. A voice like Betty Lou's gives you something to do. You get a performance going there, and if you don't take advantage of it, you're off your rocker.
Cruella was a delight, really, for the animator. At least we felt at the time, and I still feel that way.
Oh, Mark loved Cruella. He used to laugh at his drawings, too, and he loved the caricature of her, the way he was handling her.
He would be drawing, and if he liked something he was doing and it was funny, he would chortle along with when he was drawing it. And I always knew he was enjoying what he was doing and that it was going to be funny.
While some Disney villains are intimidating due to the inherent power they hold either physically or with their elevated place in society, Cruella is so very frightening simply because she has such an unpredictable, rage-filled nature. She can be momentarily friendly, but her true form of communication is in demanding compliance from everyone around her, so that she may gain whatever it is she wants in that moment. She's a raving lunatic, a once beautiful woman, now ruined by the ravages of time and a terrible attitude, doomed to desire everything evil, greedy, and self-serving, and to ignore everything pure, true, and good. There's something very sad about Cruella, honestly, something terribly tragic about a character who has money, friends, and the ability to live a life of leisure and relaxation, but chooses to throw it all away over a quest for something so violent, stupid, and unnatural. She is so obsessed with how beautiful the fur of the puppies is that she cannot appreciate the beauty of the puppies themselves as whole, individual beings with feelings, thoughts, and souls. She feels the need to destroy rather than to create, which is a common trait of Disney villains, but Cruella takes it a step further by needing to entirely destroy something so wonderful of nature's, the life of a puppy, to make something that she deems far more worthwhile, a warm and pleasingly spotted black and white fur coat. She's one of Disney's scariest villains, not because she's all-powerful, but because she's entirely too real. Unlike the evil queen, Captain Hook, Maleficent, or Chernabog, Cruella De Vil is someone that you could meet anywhere on any day. A normal person, driven to madness through sheer, selfish, cruel, and self-important force of will. In other words, just a legendary old bitch.
Not my daughter, you bitch!
Just a short one. Now, Horace, this dear hogwash ain't fit for a fancy bloke like yourself.
Horace and Jasper are two of my favorite Disney characters ever, in any of their many incarnations. From the original duo voiced by J. Pat O'Malley and Fred Warlock in this 1961 original, to their 1996 live-action remake selves, played by Hugh Laurie and Mark Williams, to their part in the belated sequel Patch's London Adventure, to even their most recent live-action appearance in Cruella. Literally any version of Jasper and Horace is absolutely peak, comedically bumbling Disney bad guys. There's something so classically and perfectly cliched about these two, a wonderfully ineffective pair of henchmen, as stupid as they are bent, as hilarious as they are hopelessly incompetent. Yeah, they're just the worst dudes. They're just bad dudes, all around. Bad people and bad at what they do. I must talk for a moment about J. Pat O'Malley and the connection to Mary Poppins here. So J. Pat O'Malley was a voice actor for Disney in many productions, including voicing Cyril the Horse in the wonderful Wind in the Willows, Mr. Toad, part of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. And so Dick Van Dyke, when he was going to be Bert in Mary Poppins, sought out help with his Cockney accent. And who else to help him but J. Pat O'Malley, a man who was not Cockney and was in fact from a very different part of England indeed than the Cockneys, and did not know how to actually do a Cockney accent.
I mean, it was the worst Cockney accent ever done, but the guy who taught me was an Irishman. Yeah. Pat O'Malley. So now I made up a story. I said, it wasn't Cockney. It's from a little obscure county in the north of England. A few Cockneys moved up there, in the 1800s. And you probably would never hear it again.
Anyway, so yeah, J. Pat O'Malley was a Lancashire man, and he did not know how to do a good Cockney accent at all, but he darn tootin' if he wasn't going to help Dick Van Dyke, and so Dick Van Dyke's Cockney turns out a lot like a mangled Lancashire, a Mancashire. That's why he sounded so freaking weird. And yet it's such a magical performance for that Mancashire accent. It's just wonderful. The Twilight Bark is a fantastic sequence in which we get to meet a whole host of other animal characters, many breeds of dogs, cats, horses, and cows. So many great designs here and voices. Such an adorable system of communication that the animals all have. A big countrywide game of canine telephone, barking from one to another to another to another until the word has been spread to all. My favorite character we meet during the sequence is the Colonel, another legendary Disney voice provided by the man himself, J. Pat O'Malley, he of the non-Cockney coaching ability. His design, however, is if anything even better than O'Malley's voice work, with huge, fluffy eyebrows that droop down to obscure his vision, along with an equally enormous grey moustache. What a good, handsome boy the Colonel is. Also, Sergeant Tibbs is fantastic. Such a great cat. I love him. And that retriever, that golden, that they also talk to. He's got such character, yes. Finally, in this section, I'll mention Nanny, voiced by Martha Wentworth, and played in the remake by the wonderful Joan Plowright. Nanny has always been another character that I absolutely adore. A sweet, kind, and totally squishable little old lady that wants nothing more than to help Roger and Anita and love and care for the puppies. She does her absolute darndest to defend the home from Jasper and Horace, and overall Nanny is just the quiet backbone of their entire household, and I just adore Martha's voice here. Just the quintessential British nanny voice. Just wonderful. Older nanny voice, I should say. To Julie Andrews' quintessential younger British nanny voice. And I outline this in my overall Princess Verse theory video that is coming out soon, but I have a theory that Nanny in this film is a reincarnation of Nanny, the dog from Peter Pan, because she was alive earlier in the century, or not even a reincarnation, but perhaps that Nanny the dog was, when she was 16, 17, 18, magically transformed into a human somehow, perhaps even with Neverland magic, and then just simply aged as a human from her teen years on, and got a bunch of extra decades of life, and eventually became nanny for a bunch of dogs, and was perhaps even specialist as a dog nanny. So yes, I like to think that Nanny the dog was turned human so that she wouldn't die, and then grew old as a human, as a dog nanny. That's my little theory for you all. And now we'll be right back after these short messages.
Feels different, too.
Go ahead, pop it.
It even sounds strong.
No other towel is made like Bounty. Comes in regular and the jumbo size.
And we're back. Hot, hot! Last of all, for characters, let's talk about the titular puppies. From Patch to Roly to Penny to Lucky to all the 80-plus others we meet later on that have already been kidnapped, the puppies are a marvelous part of the cast. It can be so easy for huge groups of characters in stories like this one to just become an indistinguishable mass with no really distinct personalities separating themselves from the group identity. The Disney crew was able to avoid this danger by giving several puppies extremely specific designs and personalities as well as names we learn. And while we don't get to know an enormous amount of them too well, we get to know just enough to truly connect with the puppies on a personal level and to deeply care about their collective fate as viewers, as well as their being freaking puppies, so of course we care. This was a story element problem Disney had somewhat run into before, having to make 7 separate dwarves, all special and different from one another in 1937, and they used similarly successful techniques with the select few named puppies that we do get to know in this film. Patch in particular did so well and has such a winning personality that they decided to make him the solo star of the sequel, Patch's London Adventure, a surprisingly solid film that I found to be easily one of the very best direct-to-video sequels Disney has ever made. Patch is great, Penny is so sweet, Lucky is just like, oh, instantly sympathetic, and Rolly I adore. I'm a sucker for chubby characters, but Rolly I just think is so cute. And I love just sort of dogs that are slightly on the beefier side and just do kind of roll around. I think that's adorable. So all four of the ones that we like really name and know well, and all of the others are just done so well. The different personalities we do get to see are all equally sweet and adorable, and in particular I've always been rather fond of Rolly. There's just something about seeing a particularly chubby, squishy little puppy moving around the screen that makes me smile. So I improv'd a bit about Rolly, and then I had a bit in the script about Rolly that I didn't even realize I had in there, so yeah, Rolly's my favorite. The puppies overall are wonderful. They work perfectly in their capacity in the story as adorable little crime victims to be sympathized with and worried over by the audience, and they are in general certainly up there as contenders for Disney's cutest ever visual creation. They might be the cutest Disney characters of all time. Yeah, perhaps. After the financial successes of both Lady and the Tramp in 1955, and even more so with this film in 1961, sandwiched around the financial failure of Sleeping Beauty in 1959, Disney Animation would veer away from princess films for almost 30 years, instead continuing this trend of making these safer for the box office, animals of human intelligence films more and more over those coming 3 decades, leading to releases such as The Jungle Book, The Aristocats, Robin Hood, Winnie the Pooh, The Rescuers, and several others, The Great Mouse Detective, Fox and the Hound, all before we would finally return to princesses with The Little Mermaid, and a little bit in The Black Cauldron. So there is Princess Ailonwy in that. She's just not in the official lineup. So it would be 26 years before we would see another princess at all on screen in a Disney film, with Ailonwy in 1985's The Black Cauldron after Aurora, and another 30 years fully before we saw another mainline Disney lineup celebrated princess in Ariel in The Little Mermaid in 1989. As mentioned earlier a few times, Bill Peet had become a dominant storytelling and visual influence within Disney animation throughout the 1940s and 50s, and in very many ways, this film and their next, The Sword in the Stone, were the culmination and creative peak of Bill's many years at the company. After years of merely being the storyboard master for the Disney company, this film finally allowed Bill to spread his wings further than any other project had before, giving him full control of the entire narrative from start to finish. The story of this film, much like the scruffier Xerox animation, is one of those elements that either just works for you or it just doesn't as a viewer. Many people love only the first half, with the beginning of the love stories, the introduction of Cruella, and the arrival and kidnap of the puppies, and find the rest of the runtime to be a bit lacking in comparison. However, on the whole, most people seem to really enjoy the entire narrative that Bill was able to craft from Dodie's original novel, and Dodie herself, as mentioned, thought it was simply spiffing, even better than she had been able to do herself. Bill did make quite a few alterations from the book, in particular the decision to condense multiple characters into one a couple of times, specifically in the case of Nanny, who was in the original book 2 separate Nanny characters, Nanny Cook and Nanny Butler, as well as cutting characters like Cruella's husband and Cat. Sergeant Tibbs, as well, was female in the original and went by Pussy Willow. Bill was able to streamline the book into a perfectly concise, tense, hilarious, action-packed thrill ride that is, to this day, in my opinion, still one of Disney Animation's funniest and most exciting stories ever.
Of course, Cruella De Vil was a character that grew out of Bill Peet's development of what Dodie Smith had written for the book. And it's really Bill Peet who came up with a lot of the ideas, a lot of the comedy, a lot of the gags, a lot of the poses and gestures even come from Bill Peet. The animators were smart enough to pick up on that and plus it and do it better.
And of course, as I always like to mention when discussing Bill Peet, every single one of the books right now on the desk was written and illustrated by Bill. I think I've mentioned it earlier in this video, but if I haven't, right here. This is The Wump World. I thought was a nice representation of Bill. But there's many others. Buford, the little bighorn I have here. Jethro and Joel were a troll. Ella, wonderful one about an elephant. Cowardly Clyde, about a horse. He loved to write about animals. The pinkish, purplish, bluish egg, which is about a griffin. That's one of my favorites. Whoop. Oh no, Asha, don't go anywhere. And so...
Hooray!
And so, yeah, Bill Peet was just an incredibly talented guy. Overall, all around, at every single thing he did, whether it was storyboards or writing or creating children's books, writing and illustrating them all by himself. He was just one of the great American artists of the 20th century, Bill Peet, and one of the men most responsible for the look and feel of early Disney animation and Disney animation on the whole. One of the most influential animation artists of all time. Due to the switch from traditional inking to the Xerox process, the shift in animation between this film and its predecessor Sleeping Beauty is one of the most radical film-to-film differences visually between two back-to-back releases in the entire history of the Disney animation canon. After that 1959 box office failure, Disney Animation had to totally rethink their approach to making animated films or risk the animation division becoming entirely unviable financially, the thing that had built the company. As we know now, the cost-cutting measures worked marvelously, ushering in an entirely new visual era of Disney. Rougher, sketchier, and now with many of the animators' actual guidelines making it into the finished product. At first, the higher-ups of Disney tried to combat this leaving in of pencil marks by creating a team of junior animators designated to go through the pencil drawings and remove the rougher guidelines from the senior animators' work and darken the intentional lines. However, the practice was largely abandoned in many scenes due to the tantrums thrown by Milt Kahl specifically, who would get incredibly irritated about his drawings being altered after the fact and by junior artists no less, leading to many of his roughs and guidelines eventually just being left alone and ending up in the finalized product. But yeah, I mean, I get where he's coming from. That's some BS. I know that, yeah, sometimes you gotta erase the guidelines, but he was just, especially because this was all ending up on screen with the Xerox, he was like, no, if it's my drawings on screen, it's gonna be my drawings on screen, damn it. Lines and all, don't erase crap. I meant that to be there. It was on purpose. While many of the artists loved the look of xerography and the feeling of finally seeing their actual sketches on screen without anybody re-inking over them and fixing them, Walt Disney himself, for one, thought it looked cheap and flawed. And this film's production would end up being one of the turning points for Walt becoming much less involved in the animation department going forward. The next 3 films that they would release in the 1960s, before or around his death in 1967, because I think The Jungle Book came out right after, or maybe before. But those 3 films he worked on somewhat, but he had much less involvement in, and we'll talk about Walt much less in the next 3 D.E.A.Rs, even though he was technically alive for those productions. But this was the last one that he was really heavily involved in, and the last film that he oversaw sort of minutely in the day-to-day decisions would have been Sleeping Beauty, and even then that one was becoming a little bit less involved from the ones before because he was working on the parks, but he did really take a huge hand in Sleeping Beauty. He did really care about that one and see to almost all of the decisions on that one, especially since it was a 6-year-long production. And so he hand-selected the leading lady. He did all of the stuff that he usually did for the princess films on that one, too. And so this film, especially with how dissatisfied he was becoming with the final product, even halfway through production, he became more hands-off by the end of this film, and then the next 3, that was the rule for that Walt just kind of looked in every now and then and said okay to some things, but yeah, I think he was a lot more involved with the production of Mary Poppins, for instance, than he was at all with the next 3 films that were animated that came out after this one. So this was really the last Walt is looking over your shoulder film in any way at all. While he did love the story of this film, at least, if not the look, by the time it was released, Disneyland had been open for 6 years already. Disney Television was truly getting going, and the company had also throughout the 1950s began producing live-action, narrative, and documentary films as well, beginning with Treasure Island in 1950, a film I will definitely review someday. There will be a D.E.A.R on all of the live-action Disney films eventually too, someday. With all of these different divisions of Disney going so strong all at once, and the animation by necessity changing for, in Walt's mind at least, the worse, it is both obvious and understandable that these were the years where Mr. Disney finally stopped caring all that much about the actual animated films that his company produced. The Xerox process would continue to dominate the look of Disney's animated releases for another 25 plus years, until Disney finally fully switched over to the 2D and 3D hybrid CAPS system of animation in 1990, with The Rescuers Down Under. Yes, while the films throughout the 1980s were starting to experiment with the CAPS system, especially The Little Mermaid, The Rescuers Down Under was the first film that they animated entirely using the CAPS system, which they would use until they switched over to fully 3D films, I believe. We even see a perfect... God, I miss the CAPS system. It was the best. Oh, if you don't know what that is, look up what the CAPS system was in animation. It was the way that they put 2D and 3D together in the 90s and 2000s for Disney and several other companies like DreamWorks, and I'm going to go a lot more into it in the D.E.A.Rs about the 90s movies, but it was just an incredible system of animation, putting hand-drawn and computer together, and I wish we still used it to this day. It's incredible. We even see a perfect visual symbolization of this shift from ink to Xerox with the cameos of Jock and the rest of the Lady and the Tramp cast at various points. These dog models from a cleaner and more refined earlier film showing up in this rougher later one, and serving as a representation of the more elegant, fantastical, and magical Disney animation of the 1950s, transitioning seamlessly into the cooler, looser, hipper Disney of the 1960s. They even did slightly redesign Jock specifically, I believe, to fit into the different world of 101 Dalmatians better, making the transition between dog stories even more buttery smooth. Speaking of the dogs, a legendary duo of 9 old men club members and best friends, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, ended up animating the dogs together. This was really on the tail end of the prime of the 9 old men era on the whole, as I believe 6 of the 9 animators in that famous club/committee animated on this film, and one of them would make it his last, as we'll get to in a moment.
That's old school.
Yeah? No school like the old school.
You can truly feel that experience here in every single frame, as well as a newly added enthusiasm installed by the switch to the brand new and ultra exciting Xerox process, as well as just a lot of confidence from having just come off working on something that a lot of them would probably have considered their visual peak work in Sleeping Beauty 1959. Mark Davis, Milt Kahl, Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnston, Eric Larson, and Wolfgang Reitherman all animated, with Wooly Reitherman directing the picture overall. With these legendary 6 on board and Peet masterminding the whole thing, it's little wonder that this film turned out to be one of Disney Animation's most celebrated and timeless visual creations of all time. Getting the dogs right visually was one of the most key elements in the entire project, so let us truly appreciate what incredible pros Frank and Ollie really were. As the concept of puppies is inherently cute, the really incredible magic trick here was to draw these 101 puppies over and over and over again to fill the frame so completely and beautifully with the dozens and dozens of little dogs. Dogs in general are fairly difficult to draw right. Make that dog a puppy, and it's even harder to capture the true inherent cuteness of it. Then add the spots, and hundreds of them, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of spots in every frame. The fact that this film was made at all is a miracle, and while the Xerox process made the animation of it possible, it is the crew of incredibly talented artists that we have to thank for fully taking advantage of the inking process being removed for this film and fully just going ham on drawing 100 plus different dogs with spots again and again and again and again and again. Anita had a different designer and animator originally before Walt felt that she just wasn't right and reassigning her to Milt Kahl. And then she got a bunch of guidelines left in. The physical modeling reference work for Anita was done once again by the gorgeous and talented Helene Stanley, who had previously provided the same work for both Princesses Cinderella and Aurora. Yes, Helene Stanley, the literal unsung Disney princess. The physical Disney princess. Maybe I'll make a video about Helene Stanley someday and call it that. Beautiful girl expert Mark Davis was ironically given the assignment of animating Cruella De Vil, which he enjoyed tremendously. He specifically had an enormous amount of fun working with Betty Lou Gerson, and Mark single-handedly designing and animating her would end up being the last work he would ever do for Disney Animation in his long and legendary career as an animator.
Betty Lou Gerson gave you so much to work with, and she was absolutely marvelous. I've had lots of compliments on the character, which pleases me no end.
It's a tour de force for him, I think. Probably the greatest animation he's ever done.
He never animated again after 101 Dalmatians. I mean, what a way to cap a career.
Slowly but surely, each and every one of the 9 old men was leaving the department. After this, Mark would move to Disney's Imagineering division, working on ideas for parks and rides, before finally hanging it up altogether in 1978 to a long and happy retirement. There was a full working wooden model car thing made for Cruella's car, which the animation staff basically ended up rotoscoping after a fashion, after filming it driving around and crashing into stuff, giving Cruella's car an eerily realistic, satisfyingly gritty and crunchy feel on screen. Last of the artists mentioned, I must talk about the wonderful Ken Anderson, who, as the production designer and art director, had more influence on the look and feel of this film than anyone not named Bill Peet. It was Anderson, specifically, who masterminded the now iconically angular and impressionistic backgrounds for this film. And Ken also played a massive role in the actual practical figuring out of how to make the Xerox process work at all on this massive of a scale. As I've said a few times throughout this review, the art style and visual differences to what came before it from Disney Animation is one of the most controversial aspects of this film. While many, both at the time and now, praise the movie's look as a breath of fresh air and a beautifully realized concept, there were then and are now many who have never warmed to the film's knowingly rough-shod animation. For me, it does indeed work a treat. I adore the lush, rich, picture-perfect medieval illumination-style animation of Sleeping Beauty before the switch to Xerox, but I also cherish the relaxed, sketchy, casually modern aesthetic from this film just as much. Or almost as much, maybe not quite as much, but very close, high up there. Both animation methods and subsequent looks are great, and both work marvelously well for me as a viewer and for their stories. Mel Levin, a well-known songwriter who worked with the likes of Peggy Lee, the Andrews Sisters, Nat King Cole, Dean Martin, and Les Brown, among many, many others, was chosen as songwriter for the film. Mel had originally written a completely different, much faster-paced composition as Cruella's theme, before eventually deciding that a more relaxed, bluesier tone and tempo were more fitting for the character and for the story.
Cruel, cruel, Cruella, devil, devil, De Vil, cruel, cruel, Cruella, devil, devil, De Vil.
Yeah, he definitely made the right decision going with the second one. It's fine, the first one's alright, but I don't know, it's not as clever as the eventual Cruella De Vil track, not at all. Not as clever by half. I love all 3 tracks in the finished film. That one, the earworm Canine Crunchies jingle they hear on TV, and Roger's other tune, Dalmatian Plantation, right at the end. But the song everyone most remembers this film for is obviously its rather unique villain song. Very few Disney villains have a villain song that has the lead sung by anyone but themselves. Gaston's song's lead singer is LeFou, but Gaston does still sing backup on the track, and he does have his own verses. But almost nobody has a number this memorable, this iconic, this damn catchy and fun, sung not by themselves or by a henchman, but by one of the film's heroes. This works so perfectly in part because the song is diegetic, Roger the character composing and singing it himself to delight and or irritate his wife. It's a brilliant twist on a trope that in 1961 was barely even in existence, as Cruella De Vil's theme is not only one of the best and most unusual Disney villain songs, but it is one of the earliest, too, that can really even be called a Disney villain song in the modern understanding of the concept. It's actually really probably the earliest one that anybody would casually point to as being a great Disney villain song, because while there were some before it, none were memorable like this one, and have remained memorable for 60 plus years like this one has. Certainly not Madame Mim's song has remained memorable like Cruella De Vil's theme. Yeah, Cruella De Vil is still like a top 10 Disney villain song, at least in terms of fame, certainly. Sung by its subject or not, it is undoubtedly one of the best and catchiest songs to ever come out of Disney animation in any era.
If she doesn't scare you, no evil thing will. Look out for Cruella De Vil.
As for the score itself, tying these songs together, George Bruns returned once again, following his work on Sleeping Beauty to provide the jazzier, far more contemporary-feeling score here. This film, in fact, became the second in a streak of 6 straight Disney animated classics that Bruns did work on the score for, either arranging or composing, from Sleeping Beauty all the way through Robin Hood 1973, meaning Bruns, as a composer, actually survived through an era shift, which is quite rare. Bruns had first done work for Disney animation all the way back in 1947 for the Mickey and the Beanstalk half of Fun and Fancy Free, so he actually worked in 3 separate eras because he was in the package era too. And George would eventually, through this 1959 to 73 period, become one of the greatest musical architects in Disney history. Up there with the Sherman Brothers, certainly, maybe even higher. Making all the important decisions about their animated scores for well over a decade. A period of time containing some of the studio's all-time most important and most influential films, especially musically, particularly Sleeping Beauty and 101 Dalmatians itself. Musically, very important films in Disney history. Bruns brought both a deep, respectable gravitas to the task of scoring Disney movies, while at the same time maintaining and putting his own spin on the sly silliness and ridiculous charm that had made Disney animation and its music what it was up till that point. Bruns took the standard of Disney scores and surged with them bravely into the future, bringing a great deal of contemporary sounds and jazz influences to this film and others in the future, never afraid to explore new sounds and genres just as much as the classics. This film overall perfectly captures the feeling of the late 1950s and early 1960s, and the music is one of the most central elements in making it all work so well. Rather than feeling dated, the film ends up being timelessly charming, as fresh now as it was in 1961, still reminding our ears of the specifics and the intricacies of that time in our history. And before we get to the Critics Roundup, it's time for one last little smoke break.
Newport Filter Cigarettes.
The most refreshing smoke of all.
Newport Menthol Cigarettes.
And now it's time for the Critics Roundup, which is the part of these videos where I like to look at, in this case, 26 different reviewers' mini reviews of the film, and at least a quote from them, and where they rank it in their ranking of the entire Disney animated canon. So their rank and review. L.S. Mark, 30th. Says that he liked it all right, but that he noticed the animation cost-cutting a lot, and that it started really well, but that he found it a bit boring overall, but loved Cruella. An extremely normie take on 101 Dalmatians is L.S. Mark, and yeah, 30th. Shea Frillis Productions, 20th, says the style is incredible and the plot is fun, and Cruella is amazing, but actually kind of underused. Sean Chandler, 10th. Calls it perfectly executed for what it's going for, loves Cruella. Dave Lee Down Under, 21st. Calls it a great blend of slapstick and artistic charm, calls Cruella one of the greatest villains ever. Brian Hull, 23rd. Says he really likes its style, that it feels very unique and really mixes things up for Disney with its visuals. I believe Brian Hull was the single lowest ranking that Sleeping Beauty had last time around, with I think either like 43rd or 48th or something like that, so he likes 101 Dalmatians significantly more than Sleeping Beauty. Big step up for Brian Hull. The Trove, 33rd, says it has a unique plot, that Cruella is the easy standout, that he appreciates the animation and backgrounds, but wishes it was more polished. Modern Mouse, 26th, says it has one of the best villains of all time, but that overall it isn't amazing, just B tier. The 90s Kid, 10th, says it isn't one of the absolute most classic Disney films, but it's definitely still up there, and he absolutely loves it. Justin Watches Movies, 18th, says it offers one of the most iconic Disney villains, that he loves the style of animation, and that the movie has great characters and really makes you feel the tension, especially whenever Cruella is on screen. The Glad in Gladiator, 29th, says the story is very tight. Chris Aitua, 14th, says it is the best of all the Disney pet movies, that the story is thrilling and interesting, and that Cruella truly elevates the film overall. Maple Street Movies, 23rd, says it's iconic and that he just really likes Cruella, and that the Dalmatians are adorable. The Movie Geek, 48th, calls it a generic and bland Disney movie. That was all the YouTube critics, and now on to the online article rank critics. Collider, 19th, says that while the story is forgettable, the art is great, and Cruella is one of the truest Disney villains. Paste Magazine, 18th, says it has style and a sly humor, and that it is a true Disney classic. Slash Film, 25th, says that while the experience is a little rough, the adventurous spirit of the story and Cruella herself make up for that. Hollywood.com, first, says that it is a miracle of scale, that it has a tremendous story, and says that it is funny, exciting, and filled to the brim with the purest Disney magic.
Hooray!
Screen Rant, 34th, says that it was the big hit that Disney really needed at the time, and that Cruella is one of their most iconic villains. My SF Reviews, 10th. Metacritic, 13th. Cinema Blend, 17th, says it's undeniably charming, one of Disney's best animal movies, and that Cruella steals every scene. The Playlist, 14th, says if you're not a dog lover before it begins, you will be by the end. Unshaved Mouse, 34th, says it has a great deal of charm and a great song, but that it has pacing issues, and they can't exactly call it a good movie overall. Feeling Animated, 23rd, says that while it is simple and minimalistic, it is well made and entertaining all the same. Darth Docking on Reddit, 28th. Rolling Stone, 6th, compliments the work of Ken Anderson, Mark Davis, and Bill Peet, and says the film proves that Disney was still capable of going in new directions. 26 rankings with an average ranking of 20.8th, or just over 20th, a lowest ranking of 48th, and a highest ranking of 1st overall from Hollywood.com, one first overall ranking. It was in 5 rankers' top 10s, and in 0 rankers' bottom 10. As you can see, it's in 4th place so far in our big running average rank from the critics' roundup of the 17 films that we have discussed so far. And I believe this is at least the second film in a row that has 0 bottom 10 rankings, with Sleeping Beauty and this both not getting anything 50th or lower. Nothing lower than the 40s. But I think that Sleeping Beauty, if I recall, had quite a few more top 10 finishes. I think it had something like 10 or 12 top 10 finishes to this movie's 5 top 10 rankings. But still, 4th out of 17 so far is pretty damn high, and 0 bottom 10 ranks for 2 films in a row. I don't think that we'll see that streak continue for too long. But we'll see. There's a lot of people who really hate Sword in the Stone, though. I love the Critics Roundup. It's so interesting. I like the ranking that we're starting to develop here. 17 movies in, it's really quite interesting to see what the sort of popular consensus is online from what I could see. This movie, more than anything else, is about family.
I got family.
Whether it's the family we birth, the family we inherit, the family we adopt, or the family that just somehow ends up finding us, this film is about the sacred bond of sharing a loving household, whether those bonds are between humans, animals, or both at once. It's about the tremendous power of kindness to bring living beings together, as we see happen with Roger, Anita, Pongo, Perdita, and Nanny caring for the many puppies. And it's about how the loss of that basic kindness can lead someone down the path of loneliness, depravity, cruelty, and outright evil, as we see with Horace, Jasper, and especially with Cruella De Vil. It's a wonderfully cozy, enormously reassuring, spectacularly well-designed and crafted, thrilling, hilarious, heartfelt family adventure film. One of the most perfect of its kind ever created.
Oh, God, it's so good. So good. So good and tasty.
There's really not a single scene in here that doesn't contain at least a couple of things I love, and each time I return to it, I just seem to end up finding more and more of those things. While it's technically in the middle of the Silver Age of Disney, this film was certainly the end of one era in terms of animation techniques, and the start of a bold new one that would last for many years. It's an important film, it's an impressive film, but most of all, it's simply a really, really good one, too. 9 out of 10. And that's it. Next time, we'll be back and discussing 1963's The Sword in the Stone, so please do join me for that as well. I really can't wait to continue the series as often as possible. Thank you ever so much for watching, and if you're still here, good night, good luck, and enjoy the afterword.